Hi, everyone. So we're just admitting a few people, doing all the technical things in Zoom land, and we are about ready to begin. So officially, welcome, welcome, welcome. It's so good to have you here. My name is Joanne, and I will be helping Faraz taking you through the proceedings this afternoon. So let's jump in. All right. Um, It's a privilege and a pleasure on behalf of Faraz to have you here with us this afternoon. It may be night or morning, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from. But hey, all is well. Thanks so much for coming. We're delighted to have you. And we hope that this webinar entitled Deconstructing Composition will help you to learn, explore, participate, exchange some ideas, all of that good stuff when it comes to wildlife photography. So in case you aren't too familiar with Faraz and his work, I'm going to attempt to deconstruct him a little bit now for you. So Faraaz Abdool is a wildlife photographer and writer from Trinidad and Tobago who specializes in birds. He is a contributing writer for the blogs 10,000 Birds and Wild Tobago. Many of his articles for the latter are also published in the Tobago Newsday. His photos have been featured by the BBC as well as Yahoo Travel, and he has written articles for Birds Caribbean and Audubon magazine. He serves on the Trinidad and Tobago Bird Status and Distribution Committee, has led numerous birding trips on both Trinidad and Tobago for the past 7 years, and has more recently begun offering birding trips to East Africa in partnership with Sisticola Tours Limited. Faraz has pursued photography for just over a decade, and during this time, he has cultivated his own naturalistic style of conveying the world as he sees it. The marriage of his keen eye and penchant for writing has culminated in the publication of his first book, entitled Casual Birding in Trinidad and Tobago, which is now available worldwide on Amazon. Faraz is a passionate fan of Mother Earth and all of her creatures. He hopes that his work inspires others to reconnect with nature in order to protect and preserve it, for there cannot be human nature without nature. So next up, we will have the presentation by Faraz, and after that, you will get the opportunity to field your questions to him and share your comments. Now, before I hand you over to Faraz, I would like to thank Catapult Arts, which is a program coming out of the American Friends of Jamaica, Kingston Creative, and Fresh Milk Barbados, without whom this presentation would not be possible today. So again, welcome everyone. It truly is a pleasure to have you join us here. And now I hand you over to the man himself, Faraz.
Thank you kindly, Madam Chairperson, and thank you to everyone as well who has joined us here for this webinar, and a warm welcome from me and in warm Trinidad and Tobago. So let me get right into it and begin by sharing my screen so we can get this show on the road. And you should all be seeing my screen now. Good. We are going to be talking about Deconstructing Composition. That's the title of this webinar, and it is really and truly deconstructing my composition because I'll be using my pictures, right? Many people have came to me and said that, you know, your pictures look very natural, and there is, I know that I have an atypical style, and I've come here to explain that style because there is a method to my madness, essentially, and that method lies in mathematics, strangely, right? The union between mathematics and nature is one of the fundamental truths of our existence, and I'm not going to get into the philosophical part of it, but realizing this existence of mathematics in creating imagery that is fundamental to my images looking the way they look. I would like for the viewer of my images to really see how things are in the lives of the animals that I photograph. And for me to properly convey that, I like my images to look as natural as possible. Now, of course, it is important for everyone to cultivate their own personal style, and I'm not going to be, disrespecting anyone else's style, but this is one of the ways that I pursue my art form. All right. So deconstructing composition, and we will start by talking about composition. So right here, we're looking at a frame, and within this frame, there are several elements. Generally speaking, we have groups of elements which are subject. In this case, it's a gull-billed tern that's banking nicely towards the camera. And we have a background. In this case, our background is made up of distant vegetation against a brooding sky. And there is another group of elements that forms a foreground. In this case, we don't have any foreground elements, but that happens. We can use foreground elements in many of our situations. Within each of these three, we would have things like lines, we would have colors, we would have textures, and so on. And the arrangement of all of these elements, that is what gives us composition. And it's really and truly that is it. I could end the presentation right here, but I'm going to delve into the details a little bit more. So let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the frame itself. Now, the frame is more than likely 4 sides in a rectangular shape. That's how we take our pictures. And the frame is specified by a ratio, right? And that ratio is the ratio of the length by the width. For example, we have 16 by 9, we have different types of aspect ratios. But before I get into that, let me give you the aspect ratios that I work in most often. Okay, I have fallen in love with the square over the past few years, and the square or 1:1 ratio tends to lend to a circular composition. I will get into that later on. The stock, or what I get from my camera uncropped, is 3:2, which is can be extended to 4:6, which is what we used to go to the photo studio and get a printout of when we develop a roll of film. Usually we get 4:6 or 5:7. Personally, I don't work much in 5:7, but I do a lot in 4:6 or 3:2. For those of you all wondering, on the right, this is a common squirrel monkey, and on the left, a Coke's hartebeest for the nerds among us who enjoy animals as much as I do. Another aspect ratio that I enjoy is 4:5, and that can be extended to 8:10, which is also a common print size. So I would like because my end product when I'm photographing is for print, I like to use these standard or accepted aspect ratios that when I go to the studio, I won't have to crop off a sliver from the edge or top or anything like that. How I compose everything is just how it is. So 4:5 is, I enjoy it because it is a little bit wider than a square, but it's not as wide as, say, a 3:2 or even a 16:9, right? And this 4:5, personally, I find it works very well in terms of portrait. So we have landscape, which is the macaws on the right, and we have portrait, which is the heron on your left. I keep mentioning 16:9, like if we spoke about it already, but here it is. 16:9 is classic widescreen, which is what is the aspect ratio of many mobile devices like cell phones. I muted by mistake. Yeah, good. Yeah, so like cell phone screens as well as laptops, computer monitors, as well as some things like smart TVs and so on. Another aspect ratio that I enjoy, and this is a recent thing, is 8:3. So you find 8:3 very popular among landscape photographers that like to include the whole panoramic view. And I was thinking, well, if I can take that panoramic ratio and apply it to an image that is shot through a telephoto lens, and I could probably get some sort of unique perspective. And I quite enjoy working in this aspect ratio, and it's a little bit atypical, but enjoyable nevertheless. It comes in really handy if you have some foreground elements that are probably a little bit distracting and you want to get rid of those without using any sort of cloning or anything like that, or extreme editing. But yeah, it also works well for printing very wide on, say, products. That's what I use them for a lot, like mugs and so on. So what about the ingredients into a good photograph, right? Um, there are several rules, as they say, the school of photography. There are rules. Of course, rules are meant to be broken, but we'll get into that. And the first basic rule of thumb is that your image should have a clean background, right? That clean background should ideally be smooth. It should be creamy. It should be dreamy, and that makes a subject pop out of the background and really, really stand out to the viewer. Now, the background can be very dark, as in the hawk on the top. It can be light or even completely white or blown out, as in the pelican on the right, or it can be graduated, as we have in the image on the bottom left. Now, before I go on, I want you to take a good look at that image on the bottom left. It is of a fork-tailed flycatcher. You can see why they call it fork-tailed clearly. Look at that background. And what I want you to see is the layers in the background. So there are 3 layers in the background. There is a very small layer on the very bottom, and then there is a medium-sized layer in the middle, and then there is a larger layer on top, which is a green layer. And approximately, if you were to draw lines, straight lines along the boundaries between each of these colors, you would find that they make the ratio 1 to 2 to 3. So it's like if this is on a paper and you fold it along the first line, you fold it twice to reach a second line, then you fold it 3 times to reach a top. It is something that takes a little while to realize, and it also is something that isn't always something that is followed to the T, as it would, but very often it's approximate, because in nature we are talking about things that are fluid. But I will come back and I will show you some other images that have that similar sort of thing, that layered nature, and so you'll get to see it in a little more obvious scenario. When you start photography, you're given, you know what the camera is, you know what the lens is, you know what exposure is, you know what depth of field is probably. And they always tell you rule of thirds. Rule of thirds is a primary rule of composition when you're talking about making any picture, whether it's wildlife or food or portrait or anything like that. You know, I don't really know much about anything else outside of wildlife photography, so forgive me. So don't ask me to come and take pictures at your wedding or anything like that. I'll take horrible pictures. But yeah, rule of thirds, for those who don't know, is like superimposing a tic-tac-toe grid on the image, and each side is divided equally into 3, and where these lines intersect, are the strongest points within the image. So what we are encouraged to do is to line things up that are strong points in your subject. You would like to line those things up with these points of intersection. For example, the subject's eye or their feet or their shoulder or something like that, as we can see from these three images. All right, so in the image of the hawk on the top, it is the one of its eyes is just above one of those points and it's looking directly at us. So it's automatically engaging, even if there is no other, um, even if the eye itself is not on the dot, on that point of intersection. The fact is that the eye is on the line, and even where the intersection is, it is on the face still. So you have some leeway in which you can work. For the pelican on the right, if there's a concept called implied motion, where for a moving subject, we have to kind of imagine where it's going to traverse through the frame. So when framing this particular image, you realize that the wing, or more or less just above the shoulder of the bird, is on one of those points of intersection. However, if we were to imagine that the bird is flying across the frame, it is going to intersect with the other 3 points. So it makes an engaging image, even though it is simply a bird against a plain background. Moving on to the image on the of the fork-tailed flycatcher. One of the points is on the bird's shoulder and the other point is close to where it's perching. So those two are very significant points in the image itself. And we spoke about implied motion, and the other thing I wanted to touch on was line of sight. So where the bird is looking, or where it is facing, or where it is directing its attention to, is also very significant in composing your image. So it is looking towards its right, which is our left, and it's looking towards where are the other 2 points of intersection. So there's a lot of interplay going on um, in what originally seems to be a simple situation of a bird on a clean background. All right, so there are, of course, many other guidelines in taking good images and making strong, arresting images of birds and wildlife. These are things like lighting. Well, you can see here the birds are all well lit, as well as sharpness. They're all sharp. Of course, there are a myriad of ways in which we can bend these rules and make images that are not exactly sharp and still have them as being effective. But if I were to talk about all of that, we'll be here until tomorrow. Apologies to those who are already in tomorrow. If you are, good morning, and it will end up being a really long webinar. So yeah, let's talk about the background first of all. And while I do make images such as the ones that we saw previously, I also enjoy, as a storyteller, telling a story with the whole frame, not just the subject, but everything that's behind the subject, everything that's in front of it. Because if we have a simple subject against a plain background, it is aesthetically pleasing, of course. However, if we want to tell a story, why can't we use the whole frame to tell that story? And as an example, we have a pygmy owl here, and that pygmy owl is positioned in the frame along one of those rule of thirds lines, right? So I'm not going to throw away the rule of thirds altogether. It's used very often. Um, excuse me. Right. But yeah, we are extrapolating them in a sense. So this background is what many people would term as a very busy background or a cluttered background, and the subject doesn't pop out of the background, which is very true. I'm not going to deny that. However, this background is telling us a story about the life of the bird, and that is something that I like to communicate with my images, right? I would like to tell people a story of how the bird lives, of how my subject faces life on a daily basis. Where does it like to be? So we can see that this bird likes to be in very tangled situations, right? This is where it is at home. In fact, if we take a good look at the bird, you would see that there are um, brown and white streaks on just above its feet, right? those those streaks, if you look at just the patterns of the branches themselves, you would find that they match. So that is in essence its camouflage. So it can sit motionless within this tangle and not be seen, right? Something else that I want you all to look at within this is, if you look carefully at the branches themselves, you will see several curly parts. These are tendrils, right? What tendrils is they are how vines grab onto other vegetation. So these aren't actually branches, they're actually vines, right? They're woody vines, which then would give you an idea of how small all of these things are, which in turn would then suggest how incredibly tiny this owl actually is. So including the background also gives you the opportunity to not only provide context, but to provide a sense of scale, right? So now we realize that these are woody vines, these aren't branches. So now we can look at the owl and say, well, yeah, that is a small bird, and it is in fact a very small bird. That if it's standing, it's not going to be more than 6 inches tall. Yeah. So we are looking to tell a little bit more of what is going on. So here we have a picture on the left of a glossy ibis that's coming in for a landing. And remember what I was telling you about the background in the fork-tailed flycatcher image previously? You look at the background, ignore the bird for now, look at the background and draw that imaginary line that is on the boundary between the layers in the background. There are again 3 layers. There is a layer of vegetation on the very bottom, and then there is a layer of distant vegetation behind that, and then behind that is the sky. Again, if you were to draw a line, let me see if, I don't know if I could get, somehow this is a different version of Zoom than what I was using before. Yeah, so if you draw that imaginary line, I'm going to have to ask everyone to use your imagination and imagine that this was that was printed out on paper, and that boundary line between the vegetation on the very bottom and the second layer, if we were to fold our paper on that line, then we would be able to fold using that same dimension, fold it again twice, and we would reach the boundary between the vegetation and the sky. And fold it again 3 times, and we would reach the very top of the frame. So we have that same ratio, 1 to 2 to 3, right? And these numbers, they keep cropping up very often, right? And they are numbers in what is known as the Fibonacci sequence, which is naturally occurring in many forms in terms of florets, in terms of acorns, in terms of logarithmic spirals, and so on. I did say that we're going to be talking about maths, right? So you were warned. So yeah, so in addition to this image of the glossy ibis, we have that layered background, and the layers form that pattern, and we have our ibis that's coming in from the right of the frame and flying into the left, right? And we leave what we call negative space that is necessary. If we have a moving subject, we have that implied motion. We need to have space within the frame. 9 out of 10 times, we have to have the space for it to go into. Of course, all rules are meant to be broken, and there are times when you can have something fly out of the frame and it is completely tasteful, right? Um, but negative space, as with everything, has to be used in moderation. Okay, so here we have a kukoi heron that has just made an unsuccessful grab at the water and made a little splash. On the right, on the lower right of the frame, there is some floating vegetation. I want you to imagine that that floating vegetation was not there. If it was not there, then we would have too much negative space and the image itself would be off balance, right? Because as with everything being fluid, balance is always very key to make um, an image that is effective and an image that is aesthetically pleasing on a natural level. All right, so if that piece of vegetation was not there, we would have been off balance and it would not have been a very pleasing picture. All right, so that balance is always necessary. Moving on, this is a picture that has the bird more or less in the center of the frame, right? So many people would have been tempted to maybe crop in close and crop in tight to have a nice picture of a harrier hawk at sunrise. And we have all the light on the feathers and everything. And you would have a nice clean background. And, you know, you can even edit some of the branches out and so on. But in that case, you would have the simple situation of a bird on a stick, which is which is quite overused in the world of bird photography. You have a bird on a stick. Birds are always perch on things that are pleasing. So sometimes you have to include other things around them to create that kind of um, dynamic nature that you would want to create an appealing image. All right. So with this picture in particular, right, you would notice that there are two main curves. There is a curve along the back of the bird, and there is a contrasting curve with the branch that it is facing, right? So if one curves one way and the other curves the other way, there is balance. Remember, balance is always of critical importance, all right? And with the curves, our eyes follow the curves, right? So if we follow that curve up the branch to the top right of the frame, and we come back down to the bird, we are now traveling along a diagonal that ends up passing through the bird and ends up on the lower left, which there is a very small piece of the tree. And why I left that small piece of the tree there is that if you look at the lower right corner, you're going to see a similarly shaped piece of sky, right? So there is opposition, but there is also balance, even though it's like yin and yang, right? You're black and white. You have wood against sky, and then you have sky against wood. And that is a concept there. One more thing with this image, I said I was not going to speak about lighting here, but I will touch on it because the diagonal the bird is on, which is generally from the bottom left up to the top right, that diagonal, right? I want you to visualize it and visualize the angle the light is coming from. If you're not sure where the light is coming from, look at the perch where the bird is sitting on, and you will realize that one part has light and one part is in shadow, right? Which tells you that the light is coming from the lower right. So the angle of the light, the angle of incidence of the light, right, where it is coming in and where the bird is on that diagonal, they make an approximate right angle, right, which is another very balanced concept in mathematics and in design and so on. All right, so all of these things are very subliminal, but I did tell you that we are going to be deconstructing compositions, right? So this image of the harrier hawk in the middle, this is an example of a circular composition where the eye naturally goes in a circle, right? it goes, you go from up the perch, you come back to the bird, you go on the bottom, and so on. You come and you continue to go right around and around. All right. Another concept is the line of beauty, which is a serpentine line or an S-shaped line, right? And in mathematical terms, it is a sinusoid, right? Which is that general waveform. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up again, and repeats infinitely, right? And that can be stretched out, it can be bunched in, and there are a host of different applications of it, right? And this line of beauty, which is a curved line, this occurs naturally in all forms of nature. In the natural world, I can't stop giving you examples of this in terms of it is a pattern of the waves in the ocean, right? It is a pattern of the tide. The tides come in, the tides go out. We as people, as beings, as living beings, we breathe in and we breathe out, right? The orbit of the Earth around the sun. If we were to map the distance between the Earth and the sun, that distance over the course of a year will shorten and it will lengthen. It will shorten and it will lengthen as we go on, right? Even light itself and every other kind of electromagnetic wave on that spectrum, everything follows that same sinusoid or that same line of beauty. So including that in an image like this, right, makes it a lot more effective than if the same wonderfully plumaged tufted cockhead were to sit on a straight stick, right? It gives it that sense of movement and of natural flow, which is so necessary, right? When you would like to create something that is natural, when you'd like to render nature as natural as she is, right? And this line of beauty can be found anywhere once you look for it, of course, right? So, for example, in this turkey vulture, if we trace the top of the bird's wing, we go up, we come down, and then we go up again. We continue to imagine that it has its other wing up, all right? But that's actually not the purpose of this particular slide. We're going to move on from speaking about the sinusoids to the golden ratio, all right? So some of you may have been familiar with the golden ratio. I did mention the Fibonacci sequence earlier. The golden ratio is related to that sequence, right? And it is defined as a number. When you add 1 to that number, you will get the same answer as if you had multiplied it by itself, right? And it is a very, very special number, a very significant number, especially in design for centuries, right? Um, this number is literally the illustration of infinity because you cannot express this number in its entirety without infinite space because it is 1.618 blah 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 blah, and that goes on forever. Those decimal points go on forever, literally. All right. So how we're applying it to a frame like this is to take one side. We're going to divide it. We're going to draw a line, not down the middle, but we're going to divide it into two, where one part, the ratio of one part to the other part, right? So we're dividing it into two parts. One is bigger and one is smaller. The ratio of the length of the smaller side to the bigger side is the same thing as a ratio of the bigger side to the whole thing. All right, I'll say it again. We're dividing it into two, and we have a big side and a small side. The golden ratio is a ratio of the bigger side, wait, I said the smaller side to the bigger side, which is the same thing as a ratio of the bigger side to the whole thing. All right. So without me going on and probably confusing myself more, I will show you by superimposing this golden spiral on this image. All right. So we are taking the length of the frame and we're dividing it by the first black line. And if we take the ratio of the smaller side to the bigger side, that's going to be the same thing as the bigger side to the whole thing. All right, and we keep on doing that. So we divide the smaller side now into two parts again, according to the same ratio. And then we continue doing that, dividing again infinitely, right? And that will trace your golden spiral, right? Which in this case goes on into the bird's eye, which is an illustration again of infinity. And the fact that it is that infinite point of the spiral is placed deliberately on the bird's eye, that is, I would say that has philosophical implications. But again, I'm not going to get into that right now. Right, but in terms of composition, you can see that even the diagonals are different from what we would be accustomed to, right? Because it is a dynamic frame, and each time we make a division, the diagonals will change, but they all intersect on the same place, which is that infinite point on the spiral. All right, so it's not like this vulture was just standing there and with a sign saying, "I'm the golden spiral, photograph me now," right? It is up to us as photographers and as artists to see these things and frame our images according to something that we would like, or something that we would find that is aesthetically pleasing. All right, so this is one of my favorite images, and I never actually broke it down ever before, and I took this in 2013, I believe, so that's a good 7 years ago. All right, so moving on, and we're still talking about numbers. All right, so in art in general, the concept of odd numbers is typically more pleasing than those of even numbers, right? You might think that even numbers are creating balance, but we have odd numbers as well as, remember, our subject, foreground, and background. So just simply having even numbers in the subject is not necessarily going to create balance when we take into consideration what's in the foreground or what's in the background. So on the left, we have three red-billed tropic birds that are flying away from us. And on our right, we have a single black-bellied whistling duck that's sitting on a post. But if we look carefully, we're going to see four other posts behind it, right? And so that's an example of, here we have a single bird sitting on a single post, but within the background, there are elements that now provide balance to what the subject is. So the four posts in the background and the one post with the duck on it give us 5. Remember, 5 as a number in the Fibonacci sequence, such as 3, right? It's going to be a recurring theme, and I want everyone to understand the intimate link that mathematics and nature has, and how important it is to really recognize this if you would like um, to pursue this style of photography, which of course is completely up to you. It's not like, oh, if you don't do it, then your pictures are terrible, right? This is just my thing. All right, so here we have an image of a brown noddy that is sitting on a rock, and here we have our three elements of our three main groups of elements of composition, which are, we have a subject, we have background, and we have foreground. Now our foreground is a gigantic rock, which many people may choose to crop entirely out of the image, right? But including this rock here it is providing some degree of context, because it's not just a bird that's sitting on a rock that could be anywhere. We now know that the bird is sitting on a rock, and it is a rocky place, right? It is a place that is full of rocks, that some are big and some are small and so on. And maybe what we're seeing in the background is also another rock, right? Um, so it tells a little bit more about the setting, right? And something else that it it shows is that we are we are sort of peeping around this rock, right? And by peeping around the rock, right, we have caught this bird in a supposedly intimate moment then, right? A moment with itself, a moment with its thoughts, right? And the fact that the bird is looking down as well as out of the frame creates tension, right? It creates a different kind of emotion than it would have if it were facing the other direction. All right. And this is up to the observer's interpretation, of course, as all art is indeed subjective, right? But by opening the door to to the possibility that this bird may be pensive or this bird may be thinking about something, right? It hopefully, that's my hope, that it will get people to think and to wonder what is really going on in the minds of animals, right? Are they really sentient creatures? Do they think, right? Do they make decisions and so on? Which are all topics that I think we should be having now more than ever. All right. Um, what else? Yeah. So regarding the foreground, if you look at the foreground, you'll see that it's made up mostly of brown rock as well as some little white bits. If you look at the bird, you'd realize that it is also brown with a little bit of white. And again, as we had with the owl earlier, this type of coloration, this is its camouflage, right? Not every camouflage is going to be the typical kind of forest camouflage that we're thinking of, right? That we've come to know and love, right? Um, but this coloration of a simple brown bird and chalky white cap makes it able to blend in with its specific environment, and an environment that many of us are unfamiliar with, because this is an offshore island, so not many of us go on these small rocky offshore islands, right? Unless you're a bird nerd like me and you go looking for seabirds. All right. Another thing on the topic of color is take a good look at the background. So directly behind the bird, there are three main colors, right? If you look hard, you will see it because they are very, very subtle. They are orange, green, and violet. And these three colors are equidistant on the color wheel. They're 120 degrees apart, and they give um, an additional balance, additional, yeah, that's what I wanted to say, balance, right? Um, to the image itself. So it's especially necessary given that this bird is looking off the frame, right? And that we have some extra balance in terms of color. Now, speaking of color, here we have an image that has absolutely no color, all right? And it is obviously for a reason. So you can take away color from your image and you can treat your image a certain way to convey a certain mood. All right. In this case, we have no foreground elements, but we have a background that is very instrumental in telling a story. All right. Had I gone and zoomed into the bird itself and waited for it to turn towards me and get the light on its face and get a nice little light glint in the eye and so on, right? It would have been an arresting image of a pelican with a broken wing, because you'd be able to see the wing properly and so on. But zooming out and looking at the bigger picture and including all where this bird has walked and dragged its wing, it it adds context, right? And it tells the story, all right? And the fact that the bird is looking back, the fact that its face is in shadow, right? All of these things create subliminal emotions, and it lends to the mood that the whole frame creates, right? Of course, I made it into high contrast. I increased the contrast and I made it into black and white. That also helped in creating this idea of the harshness that is this bird's life, and that is many of these creatures' lives, right? So the important thing always is to tell a story. In this case, the story is told not just by the bird, but by the background as well. Which brings me to another topic, another point of contention, which is subject versus setting. Which one is more um, which one is more important then, right? In terms of wildlife photography, we have the subject, which is usually an animal, and we have the setting, which is typically the habitat. All right. My view is that the habitat is all the more important than the subject. And I think that we have concentrated on the subject for too long and taken away importance from the habitats. And it's very important for us to be conserving habitat because then the animals would have a place to go. And no matter how many breeding programs you use, if there are no available habitats, then the animals cannot stay, they cannot live, right? There's no place for them to live. So anyway, let's look at this particular image with a bunch of reticulated giraffes, and they are on a riverbed, right? This riverbed is completely dry, but if you look at it, you realize that they're gathered around a little spot that looks like a hole. And I will confirm that it is indeed a hole, right? And that hole was dug by elephants. And the elephants, they can sense the water that is underground because the river never truly dries up, even though it may dry on the surface. The water just goes underneath, and the elephants can find the water. They dig the holes, and everything else from giraffes to lions to sand grouse to baboons, everything else comes to these holes that the elephants drink, and they get their life-giving water from it. So an image like this that has absolutely no elephants in it has opened the door for a conversation that led us to talk about elephants and the need for the preservation of elephants within this ecosystem that they more or less control. All right, so that is the essence of including the setting and the importance of the setting, that it tells that story, right? Um, so yeah, that is that is my point of view on this subject versus setting. Of course, everything has its place, and I could have also zoomed in with a telephoto lens and got a portrait of a giraffe, and it would have been appealing as well. Um, but from my end, I I also enjoy including a wider view where we can converse about something else. Yeah. So the setting in an image is what your subject is in, and it is of course very possible to change the setting, right? So you can use the same subject and change a setting by changing your perspective. So for example, with these four images of the same creature, well, not actually the same particular hatchling, but they're all at the back turtle hatchlings, and they were all photographed at Grand Riviere, which is a world famous beach for turtle nesting, and it boasts the highest density of turtles, leatherback turtles, actually in the entire Western Hemisphere. So it is a place that you want to go if you enjoy seeing turtles, especially baby turtles, because they are really cute, right? But anyway, the you can't photograph the same thing, and you can stand, you can sit, you can lie down, you can change your perspective. Do you photograph them from in front? Do you photograph them from behind? um, do you want them to be clean, or do you want them to be dirty? They all have their respective um, places, right? And they all tell a story, right? um, but it's also very important to continue um, changing, right? And don't take the same picture all the time. Change as much as you can. So not too far from where I photographed those leatherback turtles, um, you can have the opportunity to see one of these birds, which is a Trinidad piping guan, right? And these birds are critically endangered. They are one of the rarest birds on the planet, and many people come here in in particular just to see these birds. So if you get a picture like what we have here with the bird on an open branch and it's good light and everything, then that's good and you can pat yourself on the back. But it doesn't really say much other than I saw the bird, right? So I did this other frame some years ago with the bird very far away and through a hole in the forest, which turns out to be something a little more effective than when the bird was closer, right? So many people say you get closer to your subject, you get closer to your subject, but not always getting closer is the better. Uh, it will yield a better result if you are looking to make a picture that is going to say something, right? Or to give a certain feeling or so on, all right? Um, Other times that even if you are close, like for example, this image here of the guan on a branch, it may be necessary for you to include some words with it, right? Because if I don't say anything about this picture, it is simply a bird on a branch, and that's it, right? So what I do, I write a lot of blog articles and so on, but every time I would word my captions or word my text in such a way that it complements the image and thus makes the image itself stronger. So without saying anything, that this bird is just sitting there or standing there, whichever is your school of thought, on a branch, and that's all that there is to it. But I would say in a caption, I would also include the fact that, well, this is a critically endangered endemic bird to Trinidad. This is a Trinidad piping guan, and it has just paused from drinking some water from the bromeliad on its right because they are arboreal birds, right? Arboreal meaning tree dwelling. They very rarely come to the ground. And including that bit of information then would draw attention to the bromeliad on the immediate right of the bird's right, which is our left, all right? Um, they drink the water from there, and it gives that little piece of vegetation some importance, and thus gives a little bit more strength to the image itself. um, Another piece of advice that I have for everyone is to ensure that you are as unobtrusive as possible in your work with these animals, especially those that are endangered, right? And I just said that they are arboreal, meaning that they like to live in trees and they don't come down to the ground, right? But this particular group was comfortable enough with our presence, comfortable enough that they came to the ground and they were feeding on the ground and they were clearly communicating with each other. So spending the time and having your subject to be so comfortable with you is then going to encourage them to behave as they would behave if you were not there at all. And that is what I like to capture. So getting something as simple as a few birds in the frame, because they are social creatures. They need that social bonding, right? Um, and getting them communicating with each other. One bird's crest is even raised, and it is it is things like these that are very, very unique moments that many people don't see. So spend the time with your subject and make sure that they are comfortable. All right. And most importantly, think of different ways that you can capture your subject. So here we have a picture. I'm gonna not gonna have you guess what it is, because you know that I photograph birds, so it's very likely a bird. It is a bird. Um, it's a bird that hunts insects at night. It's called a nightjar. And I had photographed this species numerous times on Tobago. And one was hunting under some security lights when we were staying at Coffee River, Nature Retreat, which is a highly recommended place. Um, I miss there a lot. But anyway, before I start to shed some tears and so on, let's continue talking about my presentation, right? And this bird was hunting, and I figured that I can try a wide angle view. And because it was nighttime, I tried a long exposure, and I got one that came out pretty okay. Usually, if one photographs white-tailed nightjars like these, this is what you would get, right? They sleep during the day and they hunt during the night. But if you photograph any white-tailed nightjar, any other species of nightjar, during the day, you're going to have to work hard to get some kind of unique image, because this is what they're going to look like. They're just going to look like a sleeping nightjar. And but of course, with spending the time and not passing up any opportunity, right? Because many people think, well, I photographed this bird already, I'm going to move on to something else, right? Work with subjects that you have photographed already, and that is going to give you some extra, let's say, points of view, right? Different ways of seeing the same thing. All right, and of course, also use your camera gear to the best of its ability. All right, and learn about what your gear can and cannot do. For this particular image, I was lying flat on my stomach, and I used an extender to increase my focal length, so I got more reach. And I also used an extension tube, which essentially um, it puts some distance between the camera lens and the camera itself, which is giving us more magnification as well as a smaller minimum focusing distance, so I can focus closer to me, and also the image itself would look a little bit bigger, right? And of course, make sure that you don't chase the birds when you're photographing them. I left um, this mama nightjar exactly where she was, right? And sometimes, again, it's necessary to zoom in, necessary to zoom out. All right. So sometimes you focus on the details, sometimes focus on the bigger picture if you want to have a lovely, diverse portfolio. So there's one more thing that I want to talk about, and that is the concept of eye contact or eye level. Yeah. Many people can use these terms interchangeably. I believe that they are very different and they are quite distinct. All right, and let me show you what I'm talking about. Here we have two pictures, right? And one of these has both eye contact and is at eye level, and the other has neither. The other is, which is the picture on the right. We're not eye level with the bird, nor is it looking at us. The picture on the left, we are very much eye level, and that bird is looking straight into the camera. So one has two and one has none. Immediately we can see that we don't really want to have neither of them. We want to have probably two, but is one necessary? Can we just have one of those? And if so, which one? Can we have eye contact alone and not be eye level, or can we be eye level and escape the need for eye contact altogether? Well, of course, everything has its place, and let's see. All right. So here we have two pictures. On the left, there is a bird that is below the observer, but it's looking up. On the right, we have a bird that's above the observer, but it's looking down. Right. So both of the images have that eye contact. Um, However, if we're looking to tell a story or say something or have the image speak for us, right, without including any words, then I would say that these pictures fall short in that regard. Because other than saying, well, I saw a southern beardless tyrannulet or I saw a pygmy batis, that's about it. We're not going to really say much else, right? It's fine for um, a blog article or something like that, or but it's not gonna say much more, right? So both of these images have eye contact. They're not at eye level. So we have that eye contact, and it's just a photo of a bird. So let's look at two instances where we are eye level, but there is no eye contact. All right. So on the left, we have a jacana that is completely focused on what is right in front of it. Yeah. So it is obviously concentrating on what it is doing. It is living its life and it is currently hunting. Yeah. So it's muted. Yeah. Yeah. Good. I think I'm having a little glitch. Right. It is looking, this jacana on the left is looking for anything that is wiggling in front of it that can possibly become breakfast. Yeah, of course, we have a handy reflection underneath that ties that composition and balances it out nicely. On the right, we have a bird that is just about to pluck an insect from the web of a spider. And again, that is motion in the frame. That is line of sight. I touched on line of sight earlier. So it is also important to note what is your subject focusing on, and also include what its point of focus is into your frame, right? So um, by including the little insect, I hope everyone has seen that. I hope everyone has seen the little spider's web behind this bird, right? It was hunting this in this tree one morning very early. I always used to wonder why spiders would build their webs fresh every night. And then I realized this is a culprit, right? Because every morning this bird is going to be coming through this tree, and anything the spiders did not eat, it was picking it off and obviously destroying the webs in the process. Um, so yeah, we have the two situations where we don't have the eye contact. Now, some people may argue that, well, we're still seeing the eyes, but the eyes are not looking at us as we had in the example previously. Eye contact is when your subject is looking directly at you. It's looking straight down that camera, straight down that lens barrel, right? That is not occurring here, right? And if you are still not entirely convinced, right? Here we have two pictures. One on the left side, you're not seeing the bird's face at all, and it might actually take you a little while to realize what's going on, right? And it is a yellow oriole that's in the process of weaving its nest, right? So they are nest weavers. They don't build nests using sticks, but they take fibrous material and they weave them together to make lovely hanging nests. and this adult was in the process um, of building its nest, right? So, but the important thing was that we are eye level with it. So we're not looking up at it. We are looking on the same level at it. And it happened to be backlit wonderfully by the rising sun. Again, probably I will do another session on lighting if this particular session was not that wasn't too boring. All right. On the right side, we have a sleeping nighthawk, and I always like to do this with nocturnal birds that are roosting during the day, right? The reason being is that nocturnal birds that roost during the day, it is very important for them to remain undisturbed. And their closed eyes are actually aiding in their camouflage, right? Um, so in terms of ethics in wildlife photography and not disturbing your subject, right, it's always necessary to let the sleeping beast remain asleep. Yeah, and in so doing, we are seeing what how we're seeing it how it wants to be seen. It doesn't want to be seen with its eyes open and looking all alarmed and so on. It wants to be seen as just a clump of dirt. It wants to be passed over by the casual eye, and um, that's what I'm trying to convey in an image such as this by leaving the eyes closed. And speaking of closing, we have finally reached almost the end of this presentation, and I'm going to be leaving you with a few thoughts to ponder on. The first, and some of these are very, very overdone, and I apologize for overdoing it some more, but I can't stress on these things enough. Yeah, so think outside of the box, right? Um, never limit yourself to some kind of guideline that that someone else tells you, but you should do this or you should do that, especially in terms of artistic expression, right? Of course, with everything there is moderation, and with all that you do, you should strive not to negatively impact anything else that is, whether it is in your immediate surroundings or even further on, right? So, for example, we always tell you don't photograph the sun, don't point your camera to the sun, don't look at the sun. But if the weather conditions facilitate it, for example, if there's dust in the atmosphere or whatever, and you can do it, always be open to it. Next piece of advice is to expect the unexpected, another cliche. And I would, to illustrate this, I will give you a little story about this sloth. I was about to leave a park a national park in Suriname a few years ago, and someone came to me and said, "Hey, there's a sloth that has just come to the ground and it's going back up into the tree now, and if you'd like to photograph it." So naturally, I was like, "Yeah, of course." And before I knew it, I was running to photograph this sloth, to find the place where it was seen, to photograph it. And I'm running and I'm wondering, why am I running to see one of the world's slowest animals? Because everyone knows sloths are so incredibly slow, right? Um, but it was on its way up, and I immediately started to photograph it. And while I'm photographing it, I'm trying to get my breathing under control and so on. And before I knew it, it was in the canopy. So in this case, that unexpected element was the animal's behavior, right? I never in my wildest dreams, I would, and I don't ever want to tell anyone that a sloth ran away on me. So I'm very happy that I got this image and that it did not escape me. So it would be very embarrassing for me to tell anybody that I tried to photograph a sloth, but I was not fast enough, right? So yeah, sometimes your subjects can behave in unexpected ways, right? Which leads me to my last piece of advice for everyone, which is to know your subject, learn your subject, do your research, right? For anyone who's ever photographed any type of cat before, you know that they are jumpy little creatures, and this little leopard was no different. So even though it was walking away from me, I kept my camera on it, because they can turn around at a moment's notice, which happened. Some wind blew and blew a leaf somewhere, and this little leopard was like, and I got one picture, which is this one, and it subsequently disappeared into the bush, and we never saw it again. All right. So I hope you all have enjoyed. Please remember to, if you like this, follow me on Instagram or Facebook, and let's keep in touch, right? But before I hand you back over to Madam Chair, Joanne, I want you to look at this picture, right? This is another example of the 8x3 crop, and the ratio of the ocean to the sky is in 1 to 2, all right? Furthermore, there are 5 birds here, and these 5 birds, we have 3 frigate birds, we have 1 red-footed booby, and 1 brown noddy. We have 3 species, yeah? So note the numbers that I called, 1, 2, 3, and 5. They are all in that Fibonacci sequence. Thank you very much, and back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Faraz, and thank you, everyone. We go into the question and answer segment now, and we already have a question in the chat. So Faraz, Akila would like to know, with regard to the photo of the pelican with the broken wing, how many images did you take to get this picture? Do you choose this story, or are you a clicker junkie and then you select?
Thank you for your question, Akila. I'm assuming that you're talking about the pelican with the broken wing, and I probably got that in 2011 or something, so I can't remember exactly how many pictures that I took, but it varies, because sometimes you would see something that that stands out to you, and you will see a composition before you actually take the picture. In terms of the pelican, I had seen it walking, and I would have made a few images of it, and then choose the one that is most applicable to the feeling that I want to convey. So even if it was facing me in certain frames, when I look back and the face was in the shadow and everything like that, that really stood out to me, and I kept that one. So I would have keepers in a string of images. So yeah, I am a clicker junkie in a sense, but I'm also quite the opposite of that.
All right, and we have another question in the chat I'm seeing from Risha. She wants to know, when taking a photo, what do you look for to tell a story?
Yes, thank you also for that question. What do I look for to tell the story? It is really what is going on at that point in time, and it varies as well. So if like say I remember what is going on, what the bird is doing or what's happening elsewhere, so I would try to capture that moment of what is going on with the bird, as well as what is going on um, in its immediate surroundings, right? Remember, every story is different. So if for me to go out and look for a story that I would like to convey, then it's already coloring my mind and my perception then, because I honestly don't know what is out there. I don't know what is waiting for me. So I prefer to go with a clean slate and just, like see what happens, see what shows up, and whatever shows up, what it's doing, my job is just to document that.
Great. I'm seeing some nice comments in the chat, so thank you. People seem to have been very appreciative of the session. I'm seeing questions for when is the next session, so that's something Faraaz will have to answer. I'm also seeing an interesting question. Any advice for novices into cell phone photography and even obtaining their gear for further development?
Okay, yeah, I started to talk then. I was still muted. Um, cell phone photography. It depends on what you would like for your end product, and what you would like to photograph and what you'd like to capture. I would say, because we're not talking about film, we're talking about digital. My biggest piece of advice would be to start clicking. Right? If you start clicking, you are going to find something that will appeal to you, right? So look at pictures um, that are appealing, that are already appealing, right? That are universally accepted level appealing, and look at your pictures and maybe get feedback. Of course, you can always contact me via email or anything like that, and I would be happy to look at whatever pictures that you do take and give any kind of advice that I could. Um, yeah, as Preeti, I just looking at the chat here, and as Preeti very correctly pointed out, cropping is also your friend when it comes to composing after the fact. So yeah, don't be afraid to crop if you must, right? Many all of the squares that I have put out there are crops because my camera does not make images in square, and I would have to get rid of some of the the frame. Let me see. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
All right, we have another question from Adish. He wants to know about your book for us. When will it be available locally?
Thank you, Adish, for that very important question. My book is only available right now on Amazon, and I have not gotten a publisher to carry it locally. Um, that's a whole other story. But yeah, if it is only available from Amazon for now, and I really wish I could tell you when, if it would be available locally, as in local bookstores, but unfortunately I can't answer the when right now. And I'm seeing a question from Marlene as well. Marlene, what's your favorite gear for a newbie? Start with your cell phone, and you can, even if you would like to take a picture of something that's far away, there are techniques to pair your cell phone with a telescope or a spotting scope, or even a pair of binoculars, right? We call that digiscoping, so you can check that out if you like. Um, there are also, if you like a camera itself, yeah, after cell phone, there are several crossover cameras, like they call like super zooms, compact cameras. So Canon has a power shot. My first camera was a power shot from Canon. I think Nikon has cool pics and so on. But a lot of manufacturers are using mirrorless cameras right now. So Olympus and Sony, even Canon and Nikon are using mirrorless cameras, which allow you to change the lenses um, that you would use for photography. Canon T7, I think that's the Rebel series. I'm not too familiar with it, honestly, so I don't want to say that yes, it's good, or no, it's not good. But generally speaking, the Rebel series has been very good for an introduction to DSLR. Yes, I'm now seeing, yeah, from Akila, yeah, your bio, which pictures would be mathematically improved. I hope so. Am I missing any questions from the chat?
I think so far everything has been covered for us. If anyone has any further comments, questions, raise your hand, unmute, type it in the chat, anything that suits you.
Yeah, anything you'd like to tell me? You're welcome. Everyone is very welcome. Everyone, thank you for coming to this webinar, and I'm very happy to know that you'll enjoy this.
All right, so thank you, Faraaz. Thank you, everyone. Oh, I'm seeing
We have one question.
Another question came in.
We have one question. Marlene wants to know if I'm doing a workshop in Tobago anytime soon. I would very, very much love to do that. And let's see if we can try to make that happen. Because I think that there are many people, young people especially in Tobago, who are eco-conscious and anxious to do that sort of thing. Mr. Charles, what is your experience regarding security and photography in the field, especially in TNT? Does expensive camera gear draw unfriendly attention from people with intention to steal the gear, and regarding those who might spook the subjects? And what would you recommend regarding being discreet or discouraging this? Okay, so excellent question. In my experience, photographing in remote locations, I've always felt a lot safer than I would feel in, let's say, in populated areas, right? Wherever people commonly pass, like areas of high risk in my mind. So if I'm going to a location where I would think I would feel unsafe, I would keep my gear in my backpack or something like that, and try to be as incognito as possible. But yes, it is a very big risk, and it is a risk that I live with every single time I go out to do my work. Fortunately, no, my gear has never been stolen, but my vehicle has been broken into before, and with with um, with some material taken from it. So I was very happy that I had all of my camera gear with me at the time, and nothing was left in the vehicle. Let me see. Being discreet, yeah. So yeah, guard yourself, of course, when you are entering or leaving whichever remote location. If you're hearing something, I'm just brewing a cup of coffee to have now because it's 6 in the afternoon. Yeah, yeah. So always be careful, and but also be respectful to people, because very often there are people who live close by, and if you are respectful to them and you give them the time of day, and you don't snub them or anything like that, I'm not saying it's going to prevent it from happening entirely, but it would be a little bit less likely, right? I think, let me see if I can. Oh, Maxine, are you still in the cold? It seems that you are. Maxine, I want to come back and do it around in your yard. Devriti, the cat, is fast asleep on the couch that is in front of me that you can't see with the camera right now, but he's fast asleep because the air conditioner is gone. Crystal, what's my favorite piece of gear currently? It's my telephoto lens, 500 millimeter f4. and it is my go-to in terms of, or most of my bird photography. I try to alter my perspective and change my lens sometimes, but unfortunately in Trinidad, um, most of all, the birds are quite skittish and you really need that extra focal length. An amateur photographer's magazine, I think, is a fantastic idea, especially I would definitely be interested in doing an amateur photographers magazine specifically for nature photographers to promote um, eco-sensibility and ecotourism and that sort of, like foster that sort of um, thinking among our youth, especially to get people to look more into nature, to maybe try to photograph something, to maybe have their um, image published in a magazine. So yeah, I would definitely be interested in something like that. Um, well, yeah, I know people, Akila, who have had their gear stolen. I know people who have had to fight to get back their gear, and it's terrible. I know people who have had their gear dropped in airports and so on, and it's it's a very undesirable situation. Um, any plans for another webinar or workshop in Trinidad? I think I would do another webinar at some point in time in the near future, and the workshop would obviously be dictated by COVID-19 protocols and that situation. Chris, yeah, I would not be opposed to doing a session on the philosophical aspects of my photography because that forms a very big part of it. Um, I would definitely not be opposed to that once people are willing, right? Um, Good to know, Maxine. I would shoot you an email. I will shoot you an email and get to see some wonderful birds. Good. I believe I have answered everyone's questions. Have I?
Yes, you have. Thanks, Roz.
Yeah,
You
Roz.
definitely enjoy the coffee.
I always enjoy coffee, except if it's bad coffee. Then I enjoy it a little bit less.
I'm seeing another comment from
Marlene,
Marlene.
yeah. Yeah, Marlene, shoot me an email, farazabdool@gmail.com, and let's talk about this um, idea that you have, because I think it's a good idea.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, everyone. I believe we can finally wrap up now. So thank you, everyone, for your attendance, your questions, your comments, and of course, Faraz for his presentation. Thank you. I'm sure everyone is leaving here a bit more edified on photography. All right, so that's it, everyone. Do take care and be safe wherever you are. Have a good night or a good morning, as the case may be. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye, Pretty.
Cheers.